Am I the a-hole for not letting my kids ride for hours home with their grandmother? Around 1 a.m. there was a terrible crash as my 70 female mother-in-law decided to try to navigate our stairs in the dark while wearing a CPAP. She tumbled down the steps, hitting her head bad enough to bruise her face and cause some serious swelling around her ear. I immediately started calling 911, but my wife, who is a NICU RN, told me not to call as her mother had no obviously broken bones and didn't want to go. I'm not a medical professional and it's seldom wise to argue with a nurse or one's wife, but I pressed for them to at least let me drive her to the ER if they refused an ambulance, but all to no avail. This was just a couple of hours ago and she's now in the bed with an ice pack and a couple of Tylenol to avoid blood thinners. In the morning she wants to drive home and take my 9 female daughter and 13 male son to her place for the week. This has been planned for weeks and I would have no issues with it but for the fact that the woman just fell down a flight of stairs and could have a concussion. I love her and don't want her to drive at all and asked her to stay a couple of extra days, but if she insists on going I can't stop her. I told my wife I was uncomfortable with the kids riding with her given the danger and she thinks I'm being silly, which I don't understand at all as she's a very competent nurse. I finally told her that everyone could be mad at me but it simply wasn't an option. I'll take the day off and drive them if I must, but I won't take any chances. Am I the a-hole? Some answers to questions asked. 1. My mother-in-law is a retired school teacher on a very limited fixed income along with my father-in-law. There's no inheritance or other reason my wife would have wished her ill. They have a great relationship. My wife sprang out of bed the moment the accident happened and was almost detached and clinical at the moment, but was later extremely emotional. Her father had a major stroke last year, and we actually just sold our house Friday in order to move closer to her parents to help take care of them in their old age. 2. While my wife has been a NICU nurse for a decade, she was a step-down ICU nurse for 8 years. I realize that doesn't strengthen her case regarding her decision, but perhaps it adds context. She really is remarkable with babies and has saved many lives, but I can certainly understand why the circumstances of these events would paint her in a less than beneficial light. 3. In retrospect, I think my wife was in a state of shock. She's never lost anyone, and her dad's stroke is still fresh on her mind. I've lost both parents and 4 siblings plus plenty of friends my time in the service, so I have to look at her through a lens of empathy.
I'm a nurse, and I'm frankly appalled at your wife's decision to not take her mother to the ER. A 70-year-old who suffers a fall and sustains head injuries should absolutely be checked out in the ER, whether or not your wife, your mother, or the Easter Bunny believe it isn't necessary. If she absolutely refuses to go, tell her that your children will not be staying with her at her house, as you do not think it is safe. She could be suffering from a concussion or an intracranial bleed.
The fact she's on blood thinners makes the situation worse. And then she wants to not only drive but take the children for days. Those poor children will be the ones that find her if she is bleeding internally.
Not the a-hole and your wife is being blindly irresponsible just because it's her mom. I would drive them yourself and make sure your children fully know how to contact you in an emergency should anything happen to mother-in-law whilst they are there.
She's irresponsible as a daughter and a mother.
Not the a-hole. I mean, do we forget Bob Saget so soon? He hit his head, went back to bed, and didn't wake up in the morning. I'd 100% tell her your children's visit is contingent on going to get checked out before she drives home. Safer for her, safer for your children, safer for everyone else on the road during her 4-hour drive.
Same with Natasha Richardson, but that was a ski accident and she refused treatment. Always best to be looked at. I believe she passed several hours later from a brain bleed.
Not the a-hole. A concussion is the least of your mother-in-law's worries. A subdural hematoma is more worrisome and likely. I'm an adult trauma surgeon. I've rotated through NICU and pediatric surgery. I still have no business treating children. Your wife has no useful experience with care of the elderly. Bruising by the ear can be from a skull fracture, called battle sign. She meets the criteria for a CT head and C spine for age and mechanism, plus more depending on what the assessing emergency physician deems necessary. Don't let your children stay alone with your wife or your mother-in-law at this point. Your wife is an a-hole.
Update. Well, my mother-in-law was alive and conscious when we woke this morning. My wife stayed up to watch over her through the night. I spoke to my wife this morning and again shared my concerns regarding the dangers my mother-in-law would be posing to herself and our kids, and my wife was frustrated that I questioned her opinion, but when I asked if she was so utterly certain in her diagnosis sans any medical equipment that she was willing to bet both her mother and our children's lives on it, she sheepishly relented and agreed the kids would stay home and that she would encourage her mom to go to the ER. I spoke to my mother-in-law again and asked her to let me take her to the ER, and she shared that her primary reason for refusing medical care was a fear of the cost of doing so. Unfortunately, that's a serious concern of many folks here in the US. Anyways, hearing that, I firmly insisted she go and told her we'd cover any costs. She and my wife finally went to the ER, and after several hours and copious tests, it was in fact determined that she had a concussion as well as rib and wrist fractures and soft tissue injuries, bruising. My wife was pretty devastated with the diagnosis and was deeply apologetic and remorseful. My mother-in-law will be in the hospital until at least tomorrow. The hospitalist pretty directly chided both my wife and mother-in-law. All in all, I'm thankful that things didn't end up worse. The kids only cared about their grandma being okay.
Am I the a-hole for telling my friend's fiancé that it's his fault she won't eat? My friend, 29 female, and her fiancé, 30 male, have been together for 3 years, and they split all their bills. But my friend is an elementary school teacher earning poverty wages, while her fiancé is a software engineer earning 7x what she makes. He has expensive tastes and always prefers to eat out at fine dining establishments. She cannot afford to split the bill, so she will eat McDonald's or snacks beforehand, and then only order a side salad or soup, or she will just order a side salad and go hungry, because she can't afford anything else, but he insists on expensive restaurants. He always pokes fun at her eating salads. He mentioned it to our friend group at a party, and joked that women are always eating salads to watch their weight. I commented that my friend doesn't eat because she can't afford his expensive restaurants' tastes, as a woman in poverty, and it's his fault she goes without. He was shocked at this and it caused a disturbance. My friend was outraged that I embarrassed them in front of people. Am I the a-hole?
Not the a-hole. I feel like there was a point where your friend's fiancé realized that she could not keep up with his expensive tastes financially, because there is no way he didn't see that. I do want to know though, did your friend ever bring it up with him on how she couldn't afford his choices? You just said what he was thinking out loud, and he didn't like what he heard. He deserves to be embarrassed, because treating your fiancé like that is honestly disgusting unless he was totally oblivious, which still doesn't make it right. And he sounds like a D-bag for just joking about women and salads, like WTH. For the people who say that some people just go for salads, yes. You're right, some people do just go for salad, but that has absolutely nothing to do with their gender. The stereotype that women strive to be skinny to please men is so outdated and misogynistic. It's 2024, people. And in my personal take, it was obvious that OP's friend was never going to stand up for herself, and that disturbance was the wake-up call that her fiancé desperately needed. Not much of a wake-up call though. He obviously knew and chose to ignore it. I know airing out someone's finances might seem violating, but I believe it was justified here.
Not the a-hole. People who insist on splitting bills 50-50 despite making sure tons of money while their partner scrapes by are massive a-holes.
When my, now, husband started working and I was still a student, we stayed on student budget and kept splitting things, though he did treat me for my birthday, etc. I think that worked because it allowed him to save more in his first year working.
Everyone sucks here. Not sure calling him out would result in changing his behavior, but to be honest, your friend needs to communicate with her fiancé. How they can think about marriage if they don't even discuss their different financial situation, etc.
You can tell the truth and still be the a-hole. Your friend had to be humiliated after you embarrassed her in front of her friends. If you wanted to help your friend and open her fiancé's eyes, you could have done that privately to him. As a friend, not as a drama play.
Am I the a-hole for asking my dad's wife why she expected to walk me down the aisle when she's not my mom? My mom died when I was in kindergarten, and my dad didn't remarry until I, 26 male, was 22. He didn't date at all while my siblings and I were kids. His wife is fine. She's not my favorite person, and I find her a little off when it comes to her relationship with me and my siblings. They feel the same. She gives the vibe that she expected to be accepted as our motherly figure instead of as our dad's partner wife. We're close to dad. He has never given us the same vibe. He'll still hang out with us individually without his wife or each other around. But she definitely gives that vibe. It's weird to me because we were all adults and I'm the baby of the family, so my siblings were even older when she married our dad. And to think she would fill any kind of mom role, in my mind, is weird. My dad loves her though, and he's happy, and she's nice enough other than this, so we don't rock the boat. However, this is now a situation where I did start to rock the boat, and I wonder if I'm the a-hole for that. So my fiancé Ellie and I are getting married, and we decided we both wanted to walk down the aisle. She wanted to walk with her parents, so I thought it'd be kinda cool to ask my dad. He said yes. He got really emotional about it. He said he wished my mom could be here to walk with us, and yeah, I do too, so much. My dad's wife later approached me and told me she would gladly walk me down the aisle instead, and she wanted me to know that I hadn't needed to ask my dad instead. I asked her what she meant, and she assumed I wanted her but was afraid to ask. I told her that wasn't what I wanted at all. She told me that was unexpected, and when she heard I had asked Dad, she expected I would want her instead. So I asked her why she expected to walk me down the aisle when she is not my mom. She looked so offended when I asked her, and she told me I didn't need to be so tactless about it. I told her I was genuinely asking and told her I couldn't understand. She then said she clearly misunderstood the relationship she has with me and my siblings, and I can keep my thoughtless questions to myself. My dad was so confused by her reaction too. I told him what happened and he had no idea. She is really pissed off though. So am I the a-hole?
Not the a-hole. You didn't ask her the question out of the blue. She randomly approached you to discuss it and had the wrong idea from the start. When you were confused and corrected her, she was embarrassed and hurt and lashed out. I assume your dad dated her when you were 18 plus? And your siblings are even older than that. She likely is just very fond of you all and felt like you were her kids and assumed. You all just don't feel the same way. My friend's mom's boyfriend and my friend were super close. My friend considers her mom's boyfriend more of a father figure than her own dad. This was when my friend was already in her 20s. She even calls him dad. So it's not impossible to form these bonds as adults. You and your siblings just never felt that way. It's unfortunate that she assumed and it led to this.
Yes, Dad didn't start dating her until I was 19 or 20 and had stopped living with him.
It sounds like your dad purposely didn't date before you, as the youngest, moved out because he didn't want anyone having it in their head that they would be your new mother parent. He still sees you without her, knows you have a limited but respectful view of her, and he doesn't understand her thought process in this situation either. None of this is on you or your dad, but he should probably have a chat with her regarding the role you and your siblings will allow of her in your lives.
Not the a-hole. As you have said, you have no motherly connection to your dad's wife. She joined your family long after you were raised by your dad, and you had moved on into adulthood at 22. It's very bizarre that her expectation is to be treated like a parental figure when she herself knows she wasn't around to be a parent to you. She should not have assumed you meant to ask her for that role, especially when there is zero evidence or reason that you would. I would suggest, though, that instead of trying to keep the peace by avoiding the subject, you have a talk with Dad and your siblings about making your feelings clear to your dad's wife. There's no reason why you can't all have a good family relationship without someone assuming they have to be a certain role, parent or child, etc.
Not the a-hole, and glad your dad is just as confused as you are. Not sure why she would think she suddenly gets to be mom when you've all been adults for at least 4+ years before she married your dad. Also weird for her to assume that she would be the only one walking you down versus her and your dad. Maybe she also assumed your fiancé was doing the traditional dad walks down instead of both parents and thought it would be her because of the corresponding opposite gender. Either way, she seems a little out of touch with reality and too focused on the version of it which exists in her head where she's a doting mom to a bunch of adults whose bio mom died.
Am I the a-hole for refusing to remove certain foods from my house because my husband's friend is allergic? My husband and I recently moved into the same city as his childhood best friend, Steve. Steve is allergic to all nuts, legumes, and soy. Because of this, my husband wants our house to have a rule that we're not to have nuts in the house in case he comes over. I think this is a dumb rule and refuse to comply. I did agree to keep my nut-based products in a separate container, but my husband thinks that this isn't enough. I'm allergic to wheat, and we still have it in the house. I also think it's unnecessary. I don't know the extent of Steve's allergies, but I do not think it's not immediately life-threatening. He doesn't carry an EpiPen, and he also works in food service and frequently handles nuts. Being in the same room isn't going to hurt him. As long as we don't serve him food with nuts and watch for cross-contamination, we should be fine. The foods that Steve is allergic to are a big part of my diet. Also, this is where I live, not Steve, so I feel like I shouldn't have to cater to the possibility that he might come over at some point in future. But my husband is worried he'll accidentally cause his friend to have an allergic reaction if we don't keep the entire house free of allergens. Am I the a-hole for refusing to go along with that?
Steve is a visitor and may become a frequent one, given that he's your husband's best friend. He's working around the things he's allergic to and doesn't carry an EpiPen for emergencies, so there's no need to do anything other than exclude the allergens from any dishes you share with Steve. Your husband acts like the house needs decontamination because Steve is moving in and becoming the new sister wife? Not the a-hole.
Husband when Steve has an allergy. My husband is worried he'll accidentally cause his friend to have an allergic reaction if we don't keep the entire house free of allergens. Husband when wife has an allergy. I'm allergic to wheat, and we still have it in the house. Not the a-hole. It seems you come second after Steve, if you come at all, which is worrying.
I'm really bothered by the fact that if OP is allergic to wheat, she probably uses a lot of almond flour and other substitutes like that. He's asking her to give up such a giant portion of her diet for his friend who is used to handling his allergen for work. WTF.
So, your husband thinks it's okay to have your allergen in the house that you live in, but draws the line for an allergen of a friend that may be an occasional visitor? Not the a-hole. I would tell your husband that wheat is now banned from the house too, or all the products stay, and Steve doesn't visit the house. Who prioritizes a friend over their spouse?
Not the a-hole, but your husband needs to explain why Steve's allergies are more important to him than yours.
Am I the a-hole for tricking my kids into eating mushroom soup? My children are not allergic to mushrooms. My children love cream of mushroom soup. My kids hate the texture of mushrooms. When my wife uses canned mushroom soup in a recipe, she will strain out the mushrooms for the kids. However, when I use mushroom soup in a recipe, I run it through the blender. The pieces are so little that they have no texture. The kids don't complain about it and I don't waste time. My wife seems to think that I'm being an a-hole because I'm trucking them into eating something they have been very clear about not liking. I asked if she would rather eat a fistful of raw flour or a slice of bread. Preparation makes a difference. I think we are both trying to make sure that the kids eat a good meal. We just go about it different ways.
As someone who has hated mushrooms with a fiery passion their whole life, when I found out my mom has always blended some up for her Thanksgiving stuffing that I love, I admit my ego was a bit bruised. Ultimately, I learned a valuable lesson. Things, even foods, aren't black and white. There's a finely blended mushroom gray area, and that's okay. There's no vegan-vegetarian moral issue here, and I'm glad my mom tricked me, as I definitely would have refused to eat it as a kid if I knew. So I'm going with not the a-hole.
They like mushrooms enough that they eat mushroom soup. They just don't like the texture of the cooked mushrooms, so you changed the texture. How is that tricking? Not the a-hole. I don't like soft-boiled eggs. So I cook it for longer so I don't have a runny egg. Simple.
This is exactly the answer. Your wife is not thinking it through logically. Not the a-hole.
Not the a-hole. Texture issue is a real thing that a lot of people have. Not everyone likes things in their native or cooked form. You found a way for them to enjoy their favorite soup without taking out the additional nutrients of the mushrooms as well as the flavor they provide that your kids like. Changing the texture isn't tricking them, and I'm pretty sure your kids wouldn't feel tricked either. They may even be excited they can have mushrooms without dealing with the texture they don't like.
Not the a-hole. My eldest was exactly the same way about mushrooms, to the point school permission letters would include words to the effect of "My daughter will tell you she is allergic to mushrooms." She is not. If she sees mushrooms in her food, she will refuse the whole thing. Sorry. Like your child, if she couldn't see them, everything was fine. This culinary hide and seek went until she was about 10 or 11 when she accidentally ate one at someone's house, had an epiphany, and 15 years later they remain her favorite food. Good luck hiding them, and you're doing great by not just removing them from meals, because it's the easy option. Plus 10 parenting points.
What do you think of these stories? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel to see more interesting videos.